Hello and welcome back to the channel. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of you. The last video that I put out from RSPB Minsmere has done fantastically well for a channel of my size. And yeah, it was a particularly negative and down point for the channel, but it was really nice to get all of your kind messages of support. And yeah, just big thanks to everyone for that. I'll be honest, and life hasn't been that much better since. So just a few days ago, I found out that my biological father had actually passed away. At the same time, I came home and our dog Wilson has actually been castrated. Got home that evening and he'd wet himself all over my bedroom floor. I'd trodden all in it in my socks. So effectively I had pissy socks and yeah, it wasn't really a particularly good time. Then my son got ill with tonsillitis and he had like a viral cold, which as you may have noticed, he's managed to pass on to me, and I'm absolutely thrilled that on my time off from work, I'm now feeling absolutely dreadful. But spurred on by all of your nice comments and your messages of encouragement, it's kind of, even though I feel like this, it's kind of just pushed me through to make another video today. So what I've currently come to the decision to doing is I'm looking at ditching Lumix for, you guessed it, OM system. I'm going to explain my reasoning as to why I'm going to do that, because I've been a Lumix shooter for about 10 years now. So what I'll do is a quick comparison between these two cameras. So we've got the Lumix G9 Mark II that I've been shooting on for about a year now, and the OM system OM1 Mark II that I've had on loan for almost 2 months now. Now these are such similar cameras. They're both Micro Four Thirds flagship cameras, and they, respectively, they are the best cameras by both manufacturer when it comes to Micro Four Thirds. So the Lumix G9 Mark II uses a 25 megapixel non-stacked sensor. The OM1 Mark II uses a 20 megapixel backside illuminated stacked sensor. Now the differences between the two with regards to that, to be honest, I don't do a huge amount of printing, so it is nice having the extra 5 megapixels on the G9 too, but the issue is that you can have a lot more megapixels, but if you're shooting with a lens that doesn't give you enough sharpness, effectively being able to crop isn't all that important. So I'm actually usually shooting with this 100 to 400, f4 to 6.3, and I've shot on this lens for 7 years. It's been effectively my main workhorse for Lumix. The issue is that once you then go to the big white lens, when you experience what a pro lens can do, predictably, it makes this seem not all that great. And just when it comes to the build and handling, this having the really ridiculously stiff zoom is quite annoying. It's something I've had to live with for many years now. And it effectively means that you can't shoot at a subject zoomed out and then zooming in to find it. It effectively makes that almost impossible. So yes, while the G9 II might have those extra 25 megapixels, in theory, it doesn't really make all of that difference to me personally. Now, when it comes to the OM1 Mark II's backside illuminated stacked sensor, effectively what that does is it speeds everything up. So stuff like autofocus will work a lot quicker, and it also means that there should be practically no rolling shutter. But in theory, but in practice, I'll be honest, I've shot hummingbirds with the Lumix G9 Mark II using the electronic shutter, and I haven't really seen any rolling shutter distortion. The only time I've seen it is when I've panned really quickly with the camera and you're viewing that in terms of a sequence. That's effectively, I've not really experienced rolling shutter with this camera. The readout speed is about as fast as you can get from a non-stack sensor, whereas the OM1 Mark II is one of the slower stacked sensors. So in theory, that hasn't made a huge amount of difference. I found when it comes to the autofocus between the two cameras that they perform overall really, really well. On both cameras, the autofocus is really, really good. I think that the OM1 Mark II is better for birds. It's subject detection mode for birds. You can get birds from a huge distance away, whereas the Lumix, you tend to need the subject to be a little bit closer. But on the flip side of that, the Lumix G9 II just has an animal AF. So it has animal AF and IAF. It's just one sort of focusing system for animals in general. Whereas the OM1 has the bird detect and the cats and dogs. And I found it can be a little bit confusing when you've got different types of subjects. You know, if there's a deer, do you go with the bird or do you go with the cats and dogs? Whereas with the Lumix, you just kind of shoot everything in animal or IAF and it'll pick everything up. So it was a few occasions where I was just practicing and shooting at horses, and the G9 II would go straight to the animal's eye. The OM1 II would sort of go, well, I know there's a subject there, but I'm not quite sure if that's a head or an eye. So I just found that when it comes to it, the G9 II works for a wider variety of animals. It's very, very rare that any kind of animal would go past and this wouldn't recognise it and wouldn't recognise the eye. It was incredibly rare for that to happen. Whereas the OM1 is faster. It certainly picks up animals a lot faster. When I was photographing the kingfishers, normally I would have to hit the AF on near shift to make sure that the G9 II picks it up, because the acquisition can be a little bit slower than the OM1 Mark II. But yeah, just in general, I've just noticed that this picks up a wider variety of animals and this is just a lot better for birds. When it comes to the stabilization, both cameras have incredible stabilization. I think the Lumix is rated to about 7.5 stops and the OM1's max is about 8.5. In practice, there's not a huge difference, and it depends on whether you've got Sync IS on the OM system camera and then you've got the dual IS on the Lumix. And yeah, effectively the stabilization, the differences between the two when you're using native lenses, I personally don't think you'll really notice. So yes, the body and handling. The Lumix is potentially a little bit bigger and heavier than it needs to be, but it was released at quite a good price, and I think a lot of that reason is that it shares the same body with the full frame S5 II. There's not a huge difference between it. I think there's about 59 grams in weight difference. The OM1 certainly feels nicer in the hand. You can feel that difference in weight. It molds to my hand quite nicely and everything is placed in a logical position. The G9 II definitely feels chunkier with a more chunky grip, but what's really confusing is the EVF on the OM1 II. I believe it's 5.76 million dots versus about 3.69. I'll leave the numbers up on the video. But the actual EVF mechanism is huge on the G9 II. It is massive. And yeah, I'm not quite sure why when it has a smaller resolution EVF, it has to have such a large mechanism there. So yeah, but apart from that, they're pretty functionally almost identical. So yeah, I like the look of the Lumix. I just think it looks straight down to business. The OM1 Mark II looks a little bit bland and, you know, maybe not quite as professional looking, but effectively they're both weather sealed and they're both great camera bodies. So with all of that said, why have I decided to leave Lumix and go with OM system? Well, the reality is that it's all about lenses. So with the Lumix Micro Four Thirds lineup, we're now extremely limited in our lens selection. You've got the Mark II version of the 100 to 400, which is compatible with the teleconverters for the first time. You've also got the 50 to 200 f2.8 to f4, the 100 to 300, and effectively, apart from the the 45 to 175, the 45 to 200, there's not a great lens selection for the micro four thirds cameras, which is a shame. The 200mm f2.8 has been discontinued, so effectively the 100 to 400, although it's a brilliant lens and it's really cost efficient and really lightweight and all the benefits that it has, the problem is at the moment that's about as good of a lens you could ever hope to get, whereas OM System have so many telephoto lens choices. You've got the 40 to 150 f2.8, you've now got the recently released 50 to 200 f2.8, you've got the 150 to 400 f4.5, you've also got the 150 to 600, that kind of rebadged Sigma lens. They've also got their own 100 to 400. So there's basically a choice with OM System to fit every single budget. And when it comes to Lumix, I didn't feel that I had necessarily an upgrade path. Yes, I could shoot on the 100 to 400 for potentially years and years to come, but I wanted something that was going to be better in low light, and I definitely wanted something that was going to offer increased sharpness over that lens. And that's where the big white comes into play, because this is the best lens that I have ever used, and potentially this is probably the best all-round lens that I'm ever going to use. So it begs the question, why don't you just stick with the G9 II and put it, or match it with the 150 to 400, and I'll quickly put the lens on the camera and explain some of my reasonings as to why I don't want to do that. So we'll mount, make sure the red dots are lined up. We'll mount the camera to the lens. Now straight away, this is something that I've noticed with putting a Lumix body on an OM System lens. If you can hear this, that is slight play in the mounting. And although the G9 II is weather sealed and this lens is weather sealed, after doing a bit of research and just hearing that, I'm not convinced that this would be a fully weather sealed setup. And if I'm going to use such an expensive pairing, it effectively means that I can't use this combo in inclement weather, which when you live in the UK is effectively all the time. Just for an example, we had sun, well, so I started filming and now we've now got clouds, which has made everything go a lot darker. Apologies for that. But yeah, that doesn't inspire a huge amount of confidence. And another reason, which I alluded to in the G9 II video that I did with this lens, you lose your dual stabilization ability. So effectively what you'll get is just a stabilization from the lens. Now for photography, that's not really an issue whatsoever, but when it comes to videography or shooting video, what it means is that a lot of the time I don't want to go out taking a gimbal head, I don't want to go out with a tripod, I want to do all of my photos and videos handheld, and that effectively becomes an impossibility when you're just using the lens stabilization alone at 400 and even at 500mm. It becomes a bit of an issue, and that's where the OM1 Mark II comes in. So what I'll do now, I'll just put the OM1 on the 150 to 400, and then there is no play in that whatsoever. So I could feel confident that this whole setup will be IP53 weather sealed, which is incredibly useful in the UK. And then I have the Sync IS stabilization, which when that's locked down, it's really, really incredible, and means that if I'm grabbing video clips or shooting at 60 frames a second, I shouldn't really have any issues there. So yes, that is effectively my main reasons for wanting to go with OM systems. One last thing, what I did was I mounted, and this is something that I really didn't expect, I mounted the 100 to 400 on the OM1. And what I was shocked by is when you put OM system lenses on the Lumix camera, there was play in the mount. When I did the reverse of that, there was absolutely no play whatsoever. And I noticed that when you're on the OM system camera and you've got the Lumix lens, you then lose that Sync IS. But I then did a quick test and did some shots at 1/10 of a second using the OM1 and the G9 II, and effectively I had the same result. I think it was a little bit better in favour of the OM system camera, which is really odd, which means that effectively OM system, just using the body stabilization alone, it's actually really good, and something I wasn't quite surprised with. I will still be keeping the G9 II for several reasons. The main one being that it is such a capable video camera. Now, when it comes to my vlogs and sort of YouTube videos, this is absolutely incredible. The autofocus in video is it's just really good. I would deem it better than the OM system, the OM1 Mark II. And it's just got such a greater variety of codecs. I mean, at the end of the day, we can shoot at ProRes up to 5.7K, 10-bit, 422. It's got 100, you can shoot at 120 FPS in Cinema 4K. The most you can do on the OM system is 60 FPS. So when it comes to a video camera, this will be so much better. And what I can do, if I'm not shooting my wildlife vlogs or vlogging with this camera, a lot of the time I might decide, do you know what, I'll mount this on a tripod and I can get really good video using that. My plan will be to sell my original Lumix G9 and my Pocket 2 little handheld vlogging camera. That will put a little bit of money towards the purchase. I've also spoken to OM Systems that have offered me a discount, and it makes the deal quite, I can justify it in my head. I thought there was no way that I would ever be able to justify such a setup, but at the end of the day, this is about as far as I will ever go. I can never ever see myself affording, or even if I could afford it, justify, you know, the big full frame lenses. And I've just been absolutely wowed by this combination for the 2 months I've had it. It's just, it looks like a mass. I mean, look at it on the camera, it looks absolutely huge, and it's a reasonable size, but it is just so incredibly lightweight. The handling of it, the internal zoom. So a few people have sort of said, well, why would you not consider the Canon RF 200 to 800? When you think about the depth of field, they'll end up being quite similar, because the Canon is f7.1 to f9. This is f4.5, and at the end of the day, they're two different lenses. This is a 150 to 400 f4.5. The Canon is a 200 to 800mm lens. But of course, when you do the sort of field of view calculations with the 2x crop factor of micro four thirds, we end up with, well, effectively a 300 to 800mm reach. But what this has over that Canon setup is, one, it's a pro lens and it's built as such. You've got that IP53 weather rating. There's no such rating on the Canon. You've also got the fact that you've got internal zoom, which means that the lens effectively is always well balanced. You've got so many different function switches, particularly when it comes to the autofocus. These focus limit settings are incredibly useful. All the function buttons on the lens itself. And you've also got this 1.25 times teleconverter, increasing the focal length to 1000mm. So yes, if you're going to use the Canon on, say, a 24 megapixel body, you could crop, but effectively you're going to need a hell of a lot of megapixels. And I think at the end of the day, the images from either setup are going to end up coming out very, very similar, but this is so much lighter, so much better handling, so much better to use out in the field, more versatile, way sharper. Yes, its asking price is a lot of money, especially compared to that Canon zoom alternative. But at the end of the day, this is a pro lens. It behaves as such. Yes, you could save some money with going to that Canon setup, but that's not something that I'm particularly inclined to be thinking about. And just using this setup, I've realised this suits me down to the ground. I've explained my reasonings why I'm looking to switch from Lumix. It won't be a complete switch. Like I said, I will still be using the G9 II for a variety of uses. Like I said, I've used Lumix for 10 years now. Absolutely love them as a brand. Just when it comes to wildlife photography in particular, I feel like just as a brand, they've kind of abandoned that niche. They're very much stuck to their video goals, and they seem way too focused on the full frame side of the market. That's not really for me to comment on. All I can say is that when it comes to full frame, effectively they've only really got one decent lens, which is that Sigma, what is that? The Sigma 300 to 600 f4, and that's about it. So yeah, there's lots of disadvantages with going to their full frame side of things, and the Micro Four Thirds lens choice, for Lumix at least, is quite limited. And if you use the OM system lenses on it, you lose some of the features why you'd buy this camera in the first place. I'm still going to be staying with Lumix, but particularly for photography, it's going to be OM system moving forward. I've now got to really rejiggle my finances and really do the best I can to make get the money together to get hold of this. But this is what I'm going to be using going forwards. What do you think of my decision? Hello, this is Joe from the future, just editing the video. Apologies for the interruption. Basically, my brother was calling from Texas. But since the video, OM released the 50-200mm f2.8 lens, and I was thinking that I could combine that with the 150-600 and end up with a more all-round and versatile setup compared to the 150-400. Now, with a 1.4 times teleconverter, those two lenses would cost me, I think, a little bit less than the 150-400, and I could use it for a variety of scenarios. For example, I've always wanted to photograph ospreys at one of the osprey hides, because at the end of the day, I think it'd be pretty impossible to do it in the wild in the UK, and a 50-200 f2.8 would be an ideal lens for that. The only real issue is the 150-600 going to be sharp enough and fast enough? And that's why I've reached out to OM System. They're going to send me out the 150-600 to try out, and also later on the 50-200. So yeah, some good content coming in the future. Please make sure that you're subscribed to stay up to date with all my videos. If you found this video useful, or you've got any comments about my decision with potentially going to OM System, please let me know in the comments. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you very shortly on the next one. Take care.